name is Chris Cuban. I'm the president of the St. Louis chapter of the Public Relations Society of America, and we'd like to thank you all for joining us. As you know, we have a number of chapters that join us every single week. This is the 11th or 12th webinar that we've done in this weekly webinar series. Go any further in what we do, but I'd like to introduce our guest speaker today. It's Sandra Fernandez. She's been a guest speaker at PRSA events all around the country and has 20 years experience working in public relations and has worked in education, healthcare, politics, government, nonprofits, and agencies. And she really enjoys working with organizations to help them tell their stories. So with no further ado, actually, I should say that she's the co-founder of Big Oak Tree Media. So Sandra, why don't you take it away? Thank you so much for being with us today.
Oh, and thank you for inviting me. This is a new experience. The Zoom environment has been an educational experience from the beginning, and it's really interesting to interact with people in this manner. So what I'm going to do is I've got a deck. I'm going to share that and share some stuff, and as I understand it, we'll be open for questions.
Please use the Q&A at the bottom, or you can use the chat feature, and I'll help moderate that a little bit. So feel free at any time to answer or ask those questions, and we'll try and answer them. And at the end, Sandra's going to have her contact info. So if you need to get in touch with her, please feel free to reach out.
Okay, so today we're talking about reaching multicultural audiences. And it's very important to note that when we're saying multicultural audiences for every one of us, that's going to mean something a little bit different. It's going to depend on what part of the country you live in, who your client is, what geographic area your target is, etc. So the first thing you're going to hear me say over and over again is learn who your audience is, deep dive into it. If you have the opportunity, learn more about them, learn about who they are and what makes them tick. So things you should learn about your audience: demographics, location, age or ages, size of family, language, heritage, education, occupations, income levels. These are things that are external. These are things that you can find out about any given audience in any area normally. Psychographics. Now, these are the things that make them tick. Values, motivation, priorities, interests, attitudes. These are the things that help them make decisions on how they're going to react to communications that we share with them, what media channels they prefer, how they make decisions, etc., etc. Now, in an ideal world, when we go through and we're building out a communications campaign on something, we would have this kind of information for our target audience. So lives in St. Louis, female, ages 45 to 65, married with children, dealing with issues of weight gain, diabetes, anxiety, lack of energy, household income, concern with health and appearance, wants a healthy lifestyle but doesn't have much time, enjoys quiet time alone in the evenings, finds fulfillment in her family and career, values time with a small group of friends. If you had the time, and as again, in an ideal world, this is what you would build up. So for a multicultural audience, the sort of stuff that you would pick up is, for example, Latinx. US Latinx population is 60 million. They represent 20% of the total US population, which means 1 in every 5 people. They account for 75% of the US job growth labor force over the last 6 years. By the year 2060, 30% of total female population is expected to be Latinx moms. That means 1 in every 3 women, adult women, is expected to be a Latinx mom. More than 70% of Latinx ages 5 and older speak English proficiently. So this is stuff that I went out and I pulled from a variety of research. Pew Internet and Nielsen are both very good sources of pulling this kind of info. And they've got info like this on Black audiences, on Asian audiences, and on other multicultural communities in the US. 27% live in multi-generational households, which means that normally there are at least 2 different generations in the house. It might be children and adults, it might be children, adults, and grandparents. 48% of Latinx households have children under the age of 18. The median age is 28. Nearly 79% of Latinx living in the US are US citizens. So, what does that mean for how they make decisions? They're passionate about their environment and are inclined to buy local. They select brands whose image and values align with their own. And they like to support brands that support social causes at a higher rate than that for total population. So all of this is great information to have. And obviously I had the time to go out and build this. Usually though, this is what we get when somebody asks us to do a campaign or to put out a message. I want to reach everybody in the state under the age of 35. We need to put this out to families interested in education issues. Oh, what we want to do is we want to target anyone who bought a car last year. Oh, this is a campaign for Hispanic audiences. And that is the sum total of what you're told. And you have 5 days to put something together and not enough time to put everything out. So that really makes it difficult to put out something, especially when you're dealing with multicultural audiences. But there are still things that you can do that you will know. What do you know? Geography. What area do they live in? What do you know? Language. What language are you going to be using to put this in? Is this a English dominant audience? Is this an immigrant audience? Is this an audience where you're going to put this out in multiple languages? Race and culture. Is that a relevant issue here? Commonalities. What things do these audiences have in common that you can tap into? Desires and other stuff. Desired outcome. What is your call to action going to be? And starting there, how are you going to invoke that in them? So what do you know? The population nationally is changing. So the Latinx population is expected to nearly double by the year 2060, or with the growth rate of about 90%. Black population is expected to increase by about 40%. However, the Asian population will increase by more than 100%. Right now in most communities, it's the fastest growing segment. It's not making a lot of media because they still are a very small in total numbers, but the growth percentage is there. And in communities where they already have a high Asian population, that's a number to pay attention to. And it's not just demographics, it's psychographics. The way that these audiences interact with each other and with general market audiences is changing. So don't assume that because this is happening at a national trend, that the changes are happening the same everywhere. Austin, for example, is one of those few cities where diversity is actually decreasing. And that should be taken into account. I did a presentation there earlier this year where the conversation was, how do we address the issue of multicultural communications in a city that's becoming, in the city proper, less diverse, but where the workforce is coming in from the adjoining areas and they are still multicultural. So it's going to be one of those things. Learn who your audience is. For all of this, your new best friends should be either the business librarian at your local library, a contact at the local small business administration office or the small business development center who have people on staff with experience and resources to help you identify and build what the market looks like where you're going to be building your campaign. And they're my absolute best friends. They give me some suggestions on tools to use, places to find information, and help me build out my target market so that I can identify what the communications campaign is that will work the best for them. When? Okay, so let's be honest. Most of us only think of multicultural audiences during heritage months, during times of crisis, something happened, when we've received a complaint, or when it's in the news. And if this is the approach that you're having, you're approaching this wrong. If the only time that you are putting out photographs of people of color is during Black History Month, Asian American Pacific American Heritage Month, Hispanic Heritage Month, Native American Heritage Month, or even Women's History Month for women, then you're doing this the wrong way. If you're only putting out messages when something happened in the media, then you're probably not building strong relationships with multicultural audiences. What you want to do is you want to make sure that these audiences are part of your total messaging outreach all of the time. And that doesn't mean that you have to put out specialty messages to each of the audiences throughout the year. You just have to make sure that they're visible and part of everything that you're doing.
Sandra, we do have a quick question in the
Sure.
Q&A, and Crystal's asked the question is, just for clarity, can you give us an accurate description or definition of Latinx? Some of us have never heard that terminology, so.
And I've got an entire slide on that later, but I'll be happy to address it early. So when it comes to multicultural audiences in the US, labels are a very important first step you've got to address. What are you going to call us? As a woman of color, what are you going to call us? In Hispanic audiences, there are three terms that you're going to see a lot: Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx. Hispanic is a semi-controversial word in some areas, but it's a word that basically means, that denotes geography. You are Hispanic typically if you or your family comes from a country where the main language is Spanish. You are Latino if you or your family comes from a Latin American country. So you could be Latino if you're from Brazil, where they don't speak Spanish, but you cannot be Hispanic if you're from Brazil because they don't speak Spanish. Latinx is a newer term that's non-gender specific, all-inclusive. Spanish is a very gendered language, where a group of women are Latinas and you add one man and it suddenly becomes Latinos because the favor is towards the male gender. And in the US, especially in younger audiences, Latinx is a term that's increasingly become more popular as a way to address that. It's a more inclusive term. Again, with the learn who your audience is. If your primary audience is older, more traditional Hispanic audiences, some of them are going to be very affronted by the word Latinx because to them, that's a change that they don't want. If you happen to be a university or you're a brand or an organization where a large part of your audience is millennials, this is a term you're going to want to start adopting soon, if not today. Did that help?
Absolutely.
So let's go back to don't just show. Are you using relevant images in your campaigns or to accompany all of your messaging? I want to see myself in your photos and videos. I want to see people I recognize as your employees and customers. I want to see that you're an active part of my community. I want to know that what's important to me is what's important to you. And I want to know that you understand who I am. So to do this doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a campaign that's just to people who look like me. doesn't necessarily mean that you have to translate your content, or that you've got to put messaging out that's only relevant to the certain sectors of your community. But it does mean that at some point I need to be able to recognize that your organization or your brand actually understands who I am, serves people who look like me, and has people working there, or has people that are partnered with you who look like me. Let me put it to you from a retail perspective. You've got two storefronts with mannequins with clothing, and I'm going to go up and I'm going to see, and both of them have really pretty clothes. One of them has clothes that are 4 sizes too small, and all of it. Now inside they may have sizes that are appropriate to me, that it's perfect. The other one has a variety of clothing from 4 sizes too small to my size to sizes that are a little bit bigger. Which one do you think I'm going to go into to buy from? The one that I recognize has things to offer me. Make your visuals count. Can your audiences see themselves in your photos? Are they on your website? Are they on your social media channels? Are they in your brochures? Are you showing them using your product, interacting with them? Are you showing photographs of your customers of all colors, all of your target audiences, interacting with each other, interacting with your organization? Are you showing a diversity in age? We see a lot of photographs out there, and sometimes we tend to favor getting the young people and people of a certain age and forget the boomers and the grandparents and other stuff. Especially for a lot of audiences of color, this multi-generational relationships are very important. Grandma and grandpa. Are you showing a diversity in interests and lifestyles? Photographs are an iffy proposition. Photographs and videos are an iffy proposition. They're so important today. And the reality is that for a really good stock photography subscription can be expensive. There are ways around that where you can actually take photographs of people interacting with your business, either from creating your own stock photography to using user-generated content to buying from different sources at a lower rate. There are ways around that. It's never going to be perfect, but you should start to identify photographs that represent the audience that you're trying to target. And for the love of God, please don't use the same 4 or 5 photographs all the time for this particular, for any of your audiences. Try and make sure that you're refreshing and replenishing the stock photos or the photos that you're using on a regular basis. So how do we do this? First tip, ask for help from stakeholders, community members, and subject matter experts. I don't speak Chinese. Absolutely, positively, I do not. I don't speak Vietnamese. Before I joined the agency world, I was the head of PR for the Houston Public Library System. 43 libraries in a city that's called the most diverse in the country quite frequently. And what that means is that we had to put out messages in all sorts of different languages, and we had to address how to communicate and connect with different types of audiences. On a regular basis, we had to put information out in languages other than English and Spanish, which are the two that I can speak on with some expertise. Vietnamese is the 3rd most spoken language in Houston, which is where the library system was. We would get the content translated, but then we would have people who were native speakers go through and read it to make sure it still sounded correct to them and that there were no errors and that there was nothing there that made it through. I had to ask for help. Subject matter experts also may mean going through and making sure that you're getting some buy-in from people or some partners that may have a better understanding of the community or the culture that you're trying to communicate with, especially if you're trying to do something that's very specific or culturally, very culturally specific. Let me give you some examples on some of this. So we did already talk about what's in a name: Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx. Latinx started being used about 5 or 6 years ago, and it's been adopted a lot more in the past few years. We're seeing, so for example, last year for Hispanic Heritage Month, Hulu put as their banner, Hispanic Heritage Month, Hispanic and Latinx movies for your enjoyment. Universities are adopting it because students are requesting it. We're seeing it a lot more from media, movies, movie stars, other stuff like that, and the adoption is slowly gaining traction. Now, on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, there is still a pushback against it. So whether or not you use Latinx, Latino, or Hispanic is really going to depend ultimately on who your brand is, what your organization is like, and who your target audience is. A lot of people are using Latinx because it's more inclusive. And from that perspective, they can make a really good justification for the change. It's one of the reasons why I use it. And I have catch myself very frequently bouncing back to Hispanic and Latino and having to remind myself it's Latinx, which is an easy thing to forget for me. What's in a name? Black and African American. These terms are not interchangeable. That's an important thing to note. And even the Associated Press came out with some guidelines, I want to say last month, on how to use some of the terminology and what their preference was for capitalizing Black. These, for a lot of people especially, these terms are not interchangeable. If you want to decide which term applies and you're not sure, again, ask for help from someone who's a subject matter expert. Asian and Asian American. Also, the terms are very similar, but they're not exactly 100% the same. You're going to have to decide. And these are just the biggest of the minority groups. There are so many more. We could do an entire workshop just on that. Check your language. And that could mean so many things. Everything from make sure that your idioms and sayings that you're using are not so specific that your non-native speakers aren't going to understand what you're saying, to if you're going to translate your content, that someone who's an expert in that went back and checked it. When baby goats. About a year or so before I left the library, one of the librarians came in to tell me that a parenting magazine had rolled out a Spanish version of the magazine, which was a really great thing. She's like, but you really have to see it. And I went in and I took a look at it, and I didn't understand why she was just sitting in a chair, just laughing silly. And I'm going through and I'm reading this, and as I'm going through, it's like, Padres y sus cabritos. Parents and their baby goats. Parents and their baby goats? And she goes, think about it. Parents and their kids. They had used an automated translation tool which picked up the most obvious meaning for kids, and throughout this really pretty parenting magazine website, every time instead of children, it said baby goats. And baby goats this and baby goats that. And talk about a failure. If they'd had a native speaker go back and check it, the automated tool, someone would have caught that.
Sandra, we do have another question here.
Sure.
In the industry, there's a lot of use of the description of the word minority being negative. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'm not the person to ask about that, honestly. Not because I don't know, but because I tend to take a look at everything from a marketer standpoint. From a marketer standpoint, whether or not a minority is a negative term is going to really depend on who is telling you that they consider it to be a negative term. It's, again, know your audience. But I don't consider the word minority to be a negative term. How are you using it and in what context? But a lot of words that started out to be relatively harmless or didn't mean anything, a lot of people now are using as dog whistles, and that's a completely different topic to discuss. If you'd like, the person who brought this up, if you'd like to discuss this further, I'll be happy to have a one-on-one with you after we finish the presentation. So beyond the baby goats, let's do another one. Earlier this year, Kmart came out with this lovely campaign that was not intended for multicultural audiences. It was a nice thing about, take a calming, relaxing moment for Mother's Day. And they did this cute play trying to merge the word mom with namaste. Here's the problem. The word that they ended up with, which I'm not going to say because it's a very rude word in Spanish, ended up being a less than polite version of you suck, or a variation thereof. So it went out, very pretty ads, and every Spanish speaker that saw it goes, oh my God, what did they just do? If someone who had been a Spanish speaker had seen it, they'd had somebody on the team or anybody, if they'd had they might have been able to catch this. It wasn't a multicultural ad. It shouldn't have been an issue from their perspective, but it ended up being a fail from that because they didn't have a diverse enough group to take a look at it. Last year, I heard of this really great nonprofit that was doing this wonderful, wonderful luncheon event, and to benefit a group of refugee and immigrants in a highly densely populated refugee and immigrant neighborhood in Houston, which was great, except that after they found out, after they'd sent everything out and etc., that they had scheduled a luncheon during Ramadan, which this particular group were fasting for all day for a month. No one was going to attend. Again, it was one of those things very easy to overlook if you're not really immersed in the culture, but it was a fail from that perspective. So, sorry. Avoid cliches. And there's a reason why you want to avoid cliches, because usually a cliche is not going to be received very well. Tread carefully with humor. If you're not 100% certain that you understand how that joke is going to be taken by all the cultures that are going to take a look at it, I would say err on the side of caution. Now, if your brand, your organization is a little bit edgier, you think you can do it without harming your relationship with your audiences, absolutely move forward. But what I found is most people, if they're questioning it, they may not want to go ahead and move forward with it. Go beyond stereotypes, and you know what I'm talking about. If you're doing a Cinco de Mayo message and you've put out the maracas and the sombreros, yeah, let's not do that sort of stuff. Make your cultural cues authentic. What you want to do is a slice of life. You're trying to actually show what this looks like. The Army just stopped doing this really great advertising campaign about where they were showing how children were discussing children of color were discussing their choice to go into the Army with their parents and their grandparents, and how they involved them in the process. That was very, very authentic for the way that those relationships happen. Consumers respond to messages that speak to their customs, values, and culture, which all of us know. We like to see ourselves reflected in the brands, or at least to where it looks like we might be reflected with those brands. You want to develop flexible messaging that speaks to the diverse communities in your target audience. You want to create authentic connections with them so that their brand loyalty remains, or that you strengthen the brand loyalty, or that they do whatever the call to action is that you're putting out there. Some ideas on things that you might want to use in your messaging: aspirational, a better life, a healthier lifestyle, better education, more for your kids. Emotional, strong family connection, heritage and history, community focused. These are all messages that tend to do really well with multicultural audiences. So, for example, McDonald's put out this really great message that they use mostly in social media, and some social media, and they did a influencer campaign around where it was this really nice, really cute Latinx teen boy who was showing up for his first day at work, and mom and dad were the first ones to go through the drive-through, and here they are taking his photo. It's the whole thing to show the community, the family connection there. It's reaching out to Latinx families, but it's also something that every parent that has had a kid that goes out to have their first job will understand. I want to be there. I want to see. I want to photograph. I want to be part of it. And this is one of those commonalities that's cross-cultural. They did a really good job with it. Target and Walmart do a really good job with connecting with multicultural audiences from a marketing standpoint, from a social media standpoint, and from influencer relations standpoint, from using Spanish language music in mainstream commercials, to bringing in social media influencers to do campaigns for them, both online and on television. What they do is they bring this stuff in, but they're not specifically just to one culture. These are cross-cultural campaigns that they're doing, but they're bringing in people of all different colors, different cultures, and that people are going to recognize from their own communities.
So Sandra, we do have Crystal actually has another comment here.
Sure.
Saying that she had a corporate flyer actually that was translated into Spanish by a professional company.
Uh-huh.
And she had a native speaker look at it, and it didn't hit the mark, I guess. They found, they found that the translation were grammatically correct, but it didn't hit the spirit of the campaign. So what suggestions do you have to really better get a reflection of what was meant by the campaign, or how do you go about doing that?
So here's the biggest problem. I'm blessed that I'm a writer. I'm fluent in both languages. I studied in Mexico. My parents wanted to make sure that I was fully bilingual. I studied high school in Mexico. I understand the grammar and the spelling and all of that. And I have a writer's eye. We will typically get stuff back from a translation company, even really good ones, that are grammatically correct, that still need to be massaged, because I'm looking at it from a writer's perspective. We do this in English all the time. You'll see a first draft and it's good, but it's not quite there. You still need to change, and you'll have to change words. If you can find a translation company or a service that has somebody on there with creative experience, that would be helpful. If you can't, then you absolutely, what you did, which is getting some native speakers to take a look at it and give you some feedback, is great. What happens if you don't have either one of those options? If you don't have either one of those options, you're unfortunately going to just have to roll the dice. So here's stuff that's available now that even 3 years ago wasn't possible. Is you can go online through some of these contractor companies and hire people in South America and Mexico to do work for you, even to do editing and proofing for you. And they charge far less than you would pay for somebody in the US. I've worked with people from Mexico City to do illustrations for me for clients that needed stuff, that needed uh, uh, graphics done for a Spanish coloring book. And they were able to go through and they proofed all the Spanish for us. And it was perfect because they're native speakers.
And Sandra, I guess if they don't want to go to Mexico or whatever, they can just hire you, right?
Absolutely. You can just hire us. For Spanish. I have to hire people for Chinese and Vietnamese, and then I do the same thing that y'all do is I get native speakers to take a look at it, and I'm, trusting that they're telling me what needs to be done. So let's go through and identify what does this mean? You're doing a campaign, and by a campaign, I know that I refer to advertising a lot, but even where are you going to place your message? Where are you going to pitch? Where are you going to try and place your communications? Based on who your audience is, these are some of the options. So TV news. Based on research, Black and Latinx viewers still have a high degree of trust in local and national news. So if you're doing media relations and you're trying to place a story for these audiences, news is still a really great, viable option for them. Because, again, based on research, they have a high degree of trust in this. In Spanish language TV news, Spanish language TV news nationally and locally in Houston, but even nationally, tends to outperform English language TV news in by the Nielsen ratings for viewership. So while English language TV news is losing viewers, Spanish language TV news is still doing really well for viewership. Those are good numbers to have. Radio. Latinx audiences will over-index on radio over every other audience that there is. Something like 90%, I believe it is, of Latinx audiences will have listened to the radio at least once this week. They're also a big consumers for podcasting and for online streaming services, Pandora, Spotify, Sirius XM, all of that stuff. So from a radio perspective, radio is absolutely one of those things that you should be reaching out for Latinx. For Black audiences, radio is still a good source, but mostly for entertainment and not so much for information. If you have a campaign where you're trying to target Spanish language listeners, but your locality does not have a Spanish language radio station, often overlooked option is, I've found, a lot of Christian radio stations tend to have at least one or two shows that are targeting Spanish language listeners, either in language or not in English, but they're targeting that audience. So that tends to be a really good option for that. I've pitched and placed a lot of community affairs stories doing that. Social media. Social media is a good option for reaching out to Black audiences and to Latinx audiences. And depending on the demographics of the audience, which social media is going to be best is going to differ. Asian audiences, social media is probably not going to be your best bet for messages coming from non-trusted sources, which are friends and family. If you can get something in the friends and family recommendations and thread, that's a different story. Videos. Videos, of course, is outperforming for almost all audiences online. If you at all can put out something in a short form video, that would be recommended. Latinx audiences over-index in consumption of video and audio consumption online more than any other audience. Streaming services. Streaming services means Spotify, Pandora, Sirius, Netflix, Hulu, etc. All of these are options, and more of these have things that you can add on. So there are podcasts that you can pitch, there are radio shows that you can pitch, etc., etc. It's going to depend on your audience, and a lot of this information on which of these channels are best based on which audiences you're trying to hit are available in Nielsen research. Celebrity endorsements. Celebrity endorsements are important influencers on the path to purchase for Latinx and Black consumers. So basically, if you can get a celebrity to endorse, or you can get somebody who has a high profile for the community to endorse something or to do it, that tends to carry a lot of weight. Recommendations, digital reviews are pivotal sources for decision making. So for these audiences, you need to almost more than anything else, you need to go through and make sure that you're paying attention to things like your reviews, your Yelp reviews, your Google reviews, your Facebook reviews, all of that stuff, very important. If you can get testimonials are a great and wonderful thing. For Asian audiences, more important is consumer reviews, things that are come from more trusted resources. And again, this is all from Pew Internet and Nielsen. If you're trying to get people to, so if you were, for example, a university, and you wanted to get people to understand that your university is the best, depending on which audience you're trying to target, you would look at either a story in the TV news, first person account from one of the students, or a recommendation from somebody who graduated from there. And social media is a great thing as long as you understand the differences on how the different audiences will interact with it. Black and Latinx audiences tend to be highly social and passionate about sharing what they love and what they hate with their friends, family, and the community at large online. Asian behaviors tend to be a little bit different in that they're a little more private about their experience. Now here, this is where learn your audience. When I'm saying Asian, as you start going down the generations to more acculturated generations, is this Asian American, is it second generation, third generation, the behavior starts to change, and they start to become a lot more comfortable with sharing this sort of information online. Recommendations from friends, family, and virtual networks still play a high role, as I said, in decision making. But whether this is public or private, using social media for private conversations, it's going to depend on who your audience is. Putting the information out there in a variety of ways is going to be very crucial, but understanding who you're targeting is important as well. The last item on here is learn from your mistakes. It does not matter if you have the best of intentions and you're doing all this, you've done you've gone through your checklist, you're going to make a mistake. I've made mistakes. We've all made mistakes. Learn from it and be authentic in your desire to correct it and to do better next time. Questions?
All right, sorry about that, Sandra. We don't have any questions yet in the question, but this has been very thorough and very educational. I mean, this is awesome. I guess my next question was going to be, how do I get a hold of you, or how do people get a hold of you?
And that's this one right there. Sorry, we've got a concert going.
All good, all good. So I brought on to the panelist here, Jill Alexandra, who's the Midwest District Regional person.
Regional rep.
Regional rep. Sorry, I screwed up your title there.
Not a problem.
You want to say a few words?
I just wanted to say, Sandra, thank you so much for participating, and for everybody out there listening. These are conversations that need to be had over and over and over and over. None of us are going to remember everything that Sandra told us, unless we have the recording, of course. But, you know, the most important thing is to be open to the fact that there's always something to learn about others, and we should never assume that we know. And no, not everybody is just like us.
Absolutely.
Live by. So I would like to open it up. If there's those that have questions, I know Frederica had a question, is will the slides be available? And Frederica, what I will do, I will upload this webinar to a private link, and I will send it to you so you'll have access. And then you can view it again and kind of everything everyone said as well. So hopefully that works for you. Anybody else have any questions? I know there's a lot of people out there, so we had a good attendance here. Just ask away in the chat or the Q&A.
It's okay. I probably addressed everything.
You're a great speaker. I really, truly appreciate you doing this. I know when we spoke on the phone just for 5 minutes, I'm like, I got goosebumps. I'm like, I couldn't wait for this session.
Well, I learn from the questions that I get, so that I, you know, make adjustments the next time I speak on this topic.
That's wonderful.
And I would add, when you're looking for somebody to translate or somebody to verify what you've translated, always remember that you can contact whatever university is in your city. Typically, there are language faculty on staff teaching all different languages. So it's just another resource.
Oh, that's wonderful.
For you locally.
Thank you for the reminder.
You're welcome.
Well, and for those of you that have joined us, we truly appreciate you coming today. I know we have a number of people from different chapters across the Midwest. We are looking for more speakers. So if you are a speaker or know a speaker that might be a good fit for doing a presentation, please have them reach out to me. Again, my name is Chris Cuban. I'm the president of the St. Louis chapter. You can email me at chris@chemistrymultimedia.com, or just give us a call. 314-603-2866. We do have a number of webinars that are coming up. Next week is going to be screen-to-screen selling, how to generate new clients during COVID. On August 6th, we have Beyond Vanity Metrics with Aurora Meyer, who's a mid-Missouri, Columbia person. We have, she's an APR and a member of the St. Louis chapter as well. On August the 12th, we have a speaker of what to do when it all falls apart, and remembering that we're all PR pros. And on the 19th of August, this is going to be open to members and non-members, but soft skills in stressful times, how to speak to your clients, how to speak with coworkers. This one, she's a TEDx speaker and actually has 9 books out. And one of her books is called Tung Fu. So that's one of her bestsellers. And she's specifically asked that we have this open to members and non-members, and she's a great speaker. And like I said, 9 books. We do have a couple more questions that were posed here. So Nez says, can you give a little more insight about the use of the Small Business Administration as a resource source?
So the Small Business Administration has several different things that they make available for businesses. One is the SBA itself has a program called SCORE, where they have retired executives on there, but they sometimes will have somebody on staff that helps do research about the local market for businesses so they can write their business plans and other stuff. But if they have a small business development center in your city, which is literally an organization that's funded by the Small Business Administration, that what they do is they help businesses go out and get additional resources so that they can be successful, including they give classes and etc. Usually they'll have somebody on staff that is either a business librarian or has been trained to access business library resources that'll have access to things like databases, the census information, and other stuff that you can pull together that will help you create a snapshot of a specific audience in an area or an audience that you're trying to target. If they don't work, try a business librarian at your local library.
So Nez has another question about you specifically. How long have you worked at an agency? And I know you're the co-founder of your own agency. So why don't you tell us a little bit about your story?
Okay. I have actually been in agency world for about 6 years now. I first started out in education, higher education. I worked for the University of Houston. I worked for a variety of organizations, including the mayor's office. I was a part of a public information officer at the Houston mayor's office, and then I was head of PR for the Houston Public Library. I was at the mayor's office during, this will date me, 9/11 of all things, and I was actually filling in as a speechwriter. That was my first day because his normal speechwriter had to go out for an extended sick leave. I joined an agency about 6 years ago, and I started out at a Hispanic marketing agency in the social media department, where we did social media for brands like Walmart and Toyota and Verizon. We did it in English, targeting Hispanic audiences, and we did it in Spanish and a variety thereof. About 4 years ago, one of my friends and I got together and we founded Big Oak Tree Media. And so we've got, our clients include nonprofits and museums and art organizations and healthcare organizations.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much. I think since we don't have any more questions, why don't we end it here? And again, Sandra, we truly appreciate you joining us today and give us so much insightful information. I know I'm going to use this in my daily routine and moving forward as to the markets that I market to. So again, everyone, thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week at the PRSA St. Louis and Midwest webinar series. So thanks again today for joining us. Have a good one. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.